live streaming. They're talking to all the thought leaders, all the best-in-class people throughout today and tomorrow. Carol has a day job as well as presenting for Property Radio, which is her passion, and that is that she's the CEO of Property District, which is one of the top-tier leading communications and strategic marketing, advisory and delivery agencies right across. She's also a pioneer for PropTech, and she judges more awards than you could shake a stick at. So there's no one more competent to chair this panel on the key trends in the property market. To her right is Joanna Murphy, who hails from Cork. We try not to hold that against her. She has a thriving business in Cork, in Kinsale, and she is one of the best in class when it comes to the transactional side of being an estate agent and an auctioneer. She runs Joanna Murphy and Son Auctioneers practice. She has 25 years experience in the business. She is very user-friendly, and she is the first, as you heard there from her question, to embrace new technology. So she is absolutely at the cold face of transaction. And last by no means least, closest to me is James Tallon, who is a director with BTY, which was an international property advisory company set up in 1978. It again is best in class in terms of advisory services, and it is specialized in large-scale residential development, providing services of project management, cost management, development feasibility, and monitoring for both the public and the private sector. They operate not only here in Ireland, and I think James has a particular Cork connection and can talk about Cork Harbour as a future development. He himself worked for Altus Group beforehand. But the network of BTY extends to the UK, Canada, very busy in Toronto, Poland and elsewhere. So to discuss all the key developments in terms of infrastructure planning, dereliction, improved housing bodies and the potential for Cork Harbour, over to you, Carol.
Thank you so much, Ivan. That's a wonderful introduction, but it also means that my guests need no further introduction. So I'm delighted to be here today. The National Construction Summit is such an important event. The fact that it's a two-day event really shows kind of the signal of ambition for the industry, the range of people exhibiting here solutions, absolutely mind-blowing and really inspiring. But we don't have too many estate agents here today, and that's a real disconnect, and one that we're going to address here and try to look at the planning, infrastructure, delivery and housing as a whole ecosystem, and that's something that we're going to do today. Starting with you, Joanna, so as Ivan alluded to there, your firm is long established in Cork, and estate agent at the National Construction Summit. Where is your view in this? Because obviously you cannot deliver a product, you can't sell a product that doesn't exist.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here today. With regards to real estate agents, we're on the ground. We get to see what's going on every single day. We get to see where the demand, the supply, the hurdles, the future. And as soon as I'm composed, so I see a domestic market there, and in Kinsale, I see an international market, and in Cork, and I see a mixture of both. So from a Cork perspective, I would be, so the second-hand market would be quite buoyant. Stock obviously is harder to come on board, so as an estate agent, we have to kind of go out and get it. But when it comes in, my whole mantra is trying to encourage the young person to buy the second-hand home, to look at the second-hand home and not buy a brand new. If they can't afford a brand new house, not to go down that rabbit hole and buying something that's too expensive, that's going to take 35 years to repay and not have a life. So if they can buy a house, especially the likes of Cove, for 200,000, 220,000, avail the government grants, which we're going to tap into later, to avail the property grants, and obviously they might know friends to help them in the trade to do up that house and get on the property ladder. I think we'll all probably remember when we bought our first home. I don't think we had the picture perfect house. I had a mattress in the kettle basically when I moved into my house, and I think that the generation today needs to see that. Then you come to building of houses, which is a huge concern, especially where I predominantly work, which is Tallon. We have a massive infrastructural issue with our access onto our Great Island. We have one access point to cater for a population of 80,000 people with a massive tourism industry and what we'll talk about things for self-regarding for carbon and the work initiative that's coming down the tracks. So we, as an island, can't build any more new houses till we get that infrastructure sorted out for three reasons. One, the main reason is health and safety. What if something happens on that bridge off that Great Island? How do people go to get medical attention? And then we have the growing population. Thankfully, because we're a very attractive island, we're attracting new people to come and live there. We have an amazing transport facility from a public transport, i.e. train. And then obviously we have tourism and then regarding to the work, right? So I suppose if you're looking at Kinsale, it's a very different dynamic. That's an international market. That's a whole different ballgame. You're buying a house. They're going to buy the trophy houses, and they're quite happy to do that. So yes, that's kind of where I see the market. Planning, we can't do anything unless we get our planning sorted out. And the government are very much encouraging people to buy in towns and use, the shop building, encourage them to live overhead. And that's all very well. And I know people that have actually bought these buildings and have spent so much money on planning, still to be turned down. To be turned down because fire sites are a big issue, they're expensive. So something has to be adopted to cater for that old building that is 3 stories in height, that was used as a tenement building back in the day or accommodation, living accommodation of your commercial unit. So there's actually a lot to discuss probably today.
Yeah, there is, but actually, I think that you brought it into context for us here by saying that actually we can't have a home without the critical infrastructure that's needed to underpin it. And Jean, this is where I might turn my attention to some of the work that you've been involved in, because together with your team at BTY, you've been involved in delivering some of the, not just the largest, but the most urgent and most important social housing bundles. So you might just kind of follow on John's point there, kind of to help us put context around the delivery that we need, but the sense of urgency that's absolutely required.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. Thanks for that. I think the core thing that we've been involved in we love pork, and we've been involved nationally as well. Effectively, there's many different living models that are at our disposal here in Ireland. Some of which involve foreign investment, some of which involve domestic, being from a local authority perspective, from a local government perspective, which is funding a lot of the housing in the city, both social and affordable. And from an infrastructure perspective, to your point, we're involved in many different types of core infrastructure projects outside of social infrastructure, which include porting port expansion, and that's basically going to be the gateway into the offshore renewable space. So on the infrastructure topic alone, we've got a problem with ESB, we've got a problem with Irish Water, and in some instances we have a problem with gas supply, but that's another conversation. In the topics of ESB and Irish Water, then we're struggling. I mean, we can talk to your point about building more homes. We can talk about numbers, we can talk about stats. We need 80,000 to 90,000 homes to be pent up to land and progressive land. And we delivered 32,000 last year. So I think the government are doing a very poor job in reacting to, this new government, because we actually required, we heard from the minister, the meat around the topic is real. Infrastructure, the ESB are getting more money from the budget, which is great. But I think at the end of the day, you need more roads, you need more electricity, we need more water. And our planning system is not permitting us to provide more power. The North-South interconnector has taken about 15 years through planning and CPO processes, which basically means we have no direct link with the North. We have a lot of renewable energy to sell to us, so we can't get it fast down to the South. And the Celtic interconnector with France and Ireland, we've been good news recently on that topic, but it's gonna happen. But I think we talk about spending more money on windmills and more money on solar panels, which is great for Ireland. We know user because we can't get the power. So I think the grid is the core message, which I'm sure we heard about it today. We're going to hear about it for eons to come. 2030, You know, it's a real big target, 8% renewables. It's probably not going to happen. But flipping back into the housing realm of things, and we've been involved in all of these social housing PTPs here in Ireland. So that involved collaboration between the government and indeed the private funding sectors. We have large international investors coming into Ireland to deliver social housing and indeed design, operate, and maintain. Sorry, construction, just to be clear. But they operate the assets for 25 to 30 years. And from a value perspective, that's a good solution. There are other bundles going out. So we've delivered about 3,000 units to date onto that project. And we've got another 500 and then a subsequent or about 3,500 units onto the social housing PPPs. Outside of that side of things, group housing bodies, obviously, as we know, have been very, very active in the market, talking about multi-families, and rightly so. We have a gap. Funding structures not letting smaller developers markets, and we've stacks of mechanisms at our disposal, and the government and the LDA, of course, are giving a huge amount of this. So I think from our perspective as you know, advisors and QSs, and what our role is in helping that is the cost of construction is stabilizing somewhat, but there's challenges out there because we just don't have the infrastructure on the roads to port and beyond. And it's lacking, right? People are moving outside of Dublin. We don't have the venture. There's many issues we could talk about. But I think the important thing is the grid and water. And everything else will come on after. We can scale up. Labor can happen. People can retrain. You know, there's lots of scope for expansion on these housing targets. But the core thing is we got to do our homework first. I think we're really lacking in that element of the homework before we start saying we're going to reach 90,000 units per year.
I'm conscious that we're not just jumping topics, but actually I think what we're showing is not just the complexity, the scale of the problem, but actually the nuance in terms of how we can approach it. So let's strip it back.
Yeah, let's strip it back. Yeah.
So at its core, you're looking at project management. So forget that we're dealing with a nation. Forget that we're dealing with a housing crisis. Forget that we're dealing with an industry that has X capacity. That I don't believe that the industry under-delivered last year. I think the regulatory framework made it impossible and created an environment in which it was impossible to deliver. So taking it from where we are now in 2025, last year was not a good year.
No.
What can we do from a project management point of view? And I asked that question very conscious that our next speaker, Sean Sweeney, is sitting there, and I'm hoping that we're going to be tapping into his expertise this afternoon. But I'm asking you, from a project management point of view, forget that it's a nation. This is your project. How would you approach it?
From our perspective, I suppose, is the answer to your homework. Our planning regime is quite logjam, I suppose, at the moment. So our first route to market really on the project would be assessing the planning side of things. And obviously, doesn't matter how small or big a project is, from residential to commercial to healthcare, for the various projects we're involved in. I think getting your own the planning, making sure that we have planning, I suppose. And obviously the DAO process is supposedly untold challenges with delivering projects. So understanding that processing where you are in the cycle. And the supply chain side of things is something that we really focus in on. You know, who are the contractors? And obviously we've got some really good main contractors here in Ireland. And making sure that the project is suitable to the project. And I think, and then also the supply chain. And we've got a lot of subcontractors, but the labor of those subcontractors is something we focus in on. Then program. That's what makes the projects and what also builds the project. So there's some of the main things that we need to focus on. And then lastly, infrastructure. I know I ran there about Irish water and ESB, but those elements are the ingredients to make the project successful, doesn't matter what size of it.
You know, you talked about bringing it back to the core, focusing on grid and water.
Yeah.
So where are the challenges to that? What's standing in our way?
And it's kind of a three-legged stool. And the ESB will basically say we haven't got the funding for investment, and that has been a factor. There's been funding focus in other areas. Their issue is, okay, if they get more funding, then their own labour capacity is something that needs to be looked at, and how they deliver projects. I know they are working with their grid in many respects, but there just needs to be a holistic view of that organisation and how their structure is, and look at it as a business effectively, as opposed to somewhat perceived to be disjointed by the development sector, by the commercial sector. And yeah, we work with ESB and they have challenges of their own, like they're no different to any other organisation. It's just, they need some support, I suppose, to scale. Like any small to medium sized business that is facing long-term growth strategy. So we're presenting it as a nation, it just needs to be able to handle the process.
You referred to JR's the judicial reviews as causing untold damage, and I suspect that that's a view that might well be shared across the people here today. But is it true to say, is that the cause or is it a symptom?
It's a symptom of a process that's inevitably broken. I mean, our common law system is what it is. I mean, everyone has a right to object, and obviously, yes, advisors, developers, it doesn't matter who you are in the life cycle of a project, and you have the right to object, and stakeholders do also. I think the core thing is that we're lacking in our, and I knew the new planning bill will address some of these factors, but it's the timelines. No one likes the inevitable climate change. Funders like certainty, developers like certainty, taxpayers like certainty. If you're going to add a mechanism in structure for the long, effort, cost, design, all these elements, you're opening yourself up for a factor like a judicial review. And I'm both all and conceding a lot, and I've been a terrible lot of residential projects because they don't want to bear the burden of the cost. And the planning bill will address that burden of cost factor, but it's just not, it's not enough. I suppose the strict timelines need to be enforced. We're sitting for a 2-year ramp-up period, perhaps, from now until that is enacted. So the JOR process it's frustrating. It's bizarre. But again, I'm not a lawyer, nor I pretend to be. My perspective is that, as an advisor and the rest of our team, we want to see projects delivered. We want to help that process. But the only winner in the JOR process fundamentally is the lawyers. And that's just the fact.
No argument here, but I would say that if we do believe that particularly I think 67% of our JORs that we saw in 2024, if we believe that that's more of a symptom rather than a cause, then surely the antidote for that would be actually to engage the community at a much earlier level, to actually let people understand why we're doing what we're doing in terms of what needs to happen in terms of the infrastructure. For too long, I think infrastructure was not communicated to the wider community, to the public, in a way that was almost condescending, as if they wouldn't understand. Because the reality is, everybody who wants to build or buy home understands that they need power and connectivity and water. So I think that actually that's one thing that we'd like to see change, and that could be changed. But other challenges are outside of the control or more difficult to control. So you mentioned supply chain, and I know that's something that you've spoken about publicly as well, in terms of construction labour being one of the supply chain challenges, and the challenge of encouraging the next generation into this industry.
Okay, so if we start off with the first point, you can't build a house unless you have the infrastructure in place. It's just not going to work. People are going to object, and that's why the planning whole process is held up by JR reviews. And as you said, public consultation is a big thing which is not going out, isn't going forward for the likes of infrastructure. The other thing too is that we need more people to engage and become involved in the labour perspective of it, as a career, as a trades person. I'll tell you a story which kind of really just touched on me this week. I have a 17-year-old boy, 5th year, where construction is not part of his subject choice. He wasn't offered that choice, and most schools, to be fair, do it. This particular school doesn't, so he went out of school to do it, basically to get extra points. But for the first time, I could see him sitting at the table doing a project. And so what he did, he's a construction, he absolutely loved it. He was able to tell me how to we have very old house, what's the burn rating here, how can we insulate it? I then gave him the hurdles, how I can insulate to make my 1880 period property more efficient. I can't. The only thing that I can do is probably insulate my attic, because anything I do, I have to go to planning, and it's a listed building, so I'll come up against it. So then I spoke to him about the extension that we have, it's about a burn rating, because obviously it's a new build, and you can insulate it. So there's a 17-year-old looking at me going, why is that? So that's the younger generation coming up the tracks saying, well, that doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense. So we really need to go back to the basics. Majority of the houses in this country were built in the 18th century. A lot of dilapidated 70s bungalows, which I'm sure German Bannon spoke about earlier. And they're the houses that the younger generation, in reality, are going to buy. So how are they going to be able to make them more energy efficient? So therefore, I do think construction should be a subject in every school, and that's how you're going to encourage the younger person to get involved. And the other thing I will say is that land needs to be zoned, shovel ready, ready to go. If you were to ask me, code and sell, particularly as land, let's say in the more rural part of the town, that it was de-zoned a couple of years ago, why? There was no need to do that. So that land now needs to be zoned. And even the fact that it was de-zoned, the 8-1 planning, even the person who's living in a couple of, I think it was 5 kilometres, and they can't even get planning. So it's so strict. So where's the logic of that? There is no logic.
I think it's good when you refer to going back to basics, because there's a huge element of that. There's a lot of decisions being taken today are built on progressively poor policies over the past decade and a half. And in fact, if we were to start solving the problems, that's not the point at which we'd start. And I suppose in the spirit of going back to basics, and just touched on the risk there, what is the most important thing you think that the government should be doing now? Because I'm conscious that the article within that sort of government, what signals say and what action did the current government take to show the industry that it's ready to rely on risk and make development viable?
Yeah, it's a very global question. There are many strands to it, I suppose. Strictly from my own background now, I kind of see the world as a quantity surveyor, and way back when, looking at cost is a factor. So developers in our industry in Ireland, we export a lot of our good construction thinking, our good knowledge, work all over the world. And we see it as a Canada, etc. The main point is that we've critical component is the vast construction here in Ireland, and it's penalising, I suppose, this thing, because I'm an issue with a lot of commercial projects not making commercial sense. Like the apartment cost of delivery is about 500,000 per unit. So fully exceeding that now so far this year, like that's a holding cost. And that, if you're selling it to an AHP or also, but it's 13.5% that just clean taken away. So I think the UK has a good model, and North America has various elements that they from a tax perspective, including Canada. The VAT discussion is something that the government could do in 100 days and open the door. I know it's been eliminated off the radar by various Minister of Finance, etc., but that's something that the industry will welcome. It's something that will improve delivery, something that will help the anticipation for infrastructure improvements and housing delivery. I mean, I think it's the only lever we have to move things fast.
Yeah.
Real action. So that's it.
I think you just hit the nail on the head there. Commercial projects not make commercial sense. And this is the crux of the matter. And I suppose, final word to you, Johanna, there, what's the most important message that we need to be taking, not just from the National Construction Summit today, but you're going to take home looking at the infrastructure and hope that will have national impact?
Well, the infrastructure growth has been spoken about for 40 years, so I don't think it's going to change in the next few minutes with me discussing it. But it's just an ongoing problem. It doesn't seem to be getting solved. And, James, you're involved, and even if you could just tap on the offshore renewables for just 2 seconds. I know there's a few people here who actually wanted to hear about that. Even the offshore renewables sector, where Cork Harbour is the maritime quarter, because it has all the piece of piping in place, and you're very involved with the port and the building out of that infrastructure to support that whole industry. But again, that's infrastructure. And look at the bonuses of that: employment, energy security, ensuring that green energy goes to our own indigenous companies, getting other companies to come in from international companies to come and use our green energy. And the caveat, export that. So you know what? It's just so much involved and so much at stake if we don't get it right.
Yeah.
Want to add a final closing comment to that based on your experience, project experience in Rex City?
Yeah, so we're involved. It's an offshore renewables platform effectively. I think it's all well and good. Offshore renewables is challenging, and we're very happy to be involved in the project and delivering it. And it's going to be a really support mechanism for the, not having offshore renewables, but we also need to look at our grids. And that's something that we want to work on, but we haven't. But Bring Skate, you're doing a great job, Portic work hard, and it's going to be a gateway for our offshore renewables, right? It's going to be critical and exported. So it's great. We have to be involved, and thank you all for listening.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Rory, are we good? Yeah. I want to thank Joanne, Carol, and James. A really insightful discussion. It's our last panel discussion with 2 keynotes left. Do visit. You feel stand here, Kim?
I don't.
Okay. Okay. But do not miss straight over there in the far corner. The turbocharged engine that is Arnold is over there. Thank you all very much indeed. Very insightful. Please show your appreciation.